Hello, my name is Adam Lehner, and I'm here today to talk to you about the Fusiform Gyrus. Now, I've chosen the Fusiform Gyrus because I believe that it is so to speak, an underrated part of the brain. People typically like to talk about the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, thalamus, the cortices, so on and so forth. But for this project, I decided to talk about something that perhaps another student might not have chosen. So I chose the fusiform gyrus. I first heard about it really in a class that I took a few semesters ago, and one of my professors told me about it, told the class about it, and was explaining a story that he had read called "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat," which I'll go into more detail with later. But it was basically about prosopagnosia, and it just fascinated me. And from that point forward, I just gained interest in the fusiform gyrus, and it's so important because it works in our everyday lives when it comes to being recognized in terms of recognizing individuals. And for that reason, I think it's just underrated. So first of all, I'll start out with where is it? Well, it lies on the basal surface of the temporal and occipital lobes, with the anterior portion in the temporal cortex, while the posterior portion is in the occipital lobe. It lies as part of the Brodmann area number 37. Now, you may be wondering what the Brodmann area is, because I was when I first saw it. And the Brodmann area comes from a scientist named Corbinian Brodmann. He was a German anatomist in the early 1900s. Uh, and he was important, so they decided to name the brain regions after him. So this one makes up part of Brodmann area 37, along with the inferior and medial temporal gyri. It is also located between the parahippocampal gyrus and lingual gyrus medially, and the inferior temporal gyrus laterally. What is it? Now, the word fusiform itself actually serves quite a purpose in terms of its name. The word fusiform means tapering at both ends and spindle-shaped, which is exactly the shape of the fusiform gyrus, as well as it's a little bit wide in the middle too, which allows for the tapering at both ends. Now, the most general function involves being a center for the higher processing of visual information. But the secondary functions include memory, though, as we know, that's primarily done in the hippocampus, but there's still some memory that goes on in the fusiform gyrus. Uh, but, of course, the hippocampus is actually located relatively close to the fusiform gyrus. Also, there is multisensory integration and perception, as a lot of perception and attention goes on in the temporal lobe, which, of course, the anterior part of the fusiform gyrus lies within. Specifically, the fusiform gyrus is involved with the processing of colors, as well as face, body, and word recognition. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that shortly. It also has a relationship with the angular gyrus, which is involved in higher color processing. The fusiform gyrus communicates with a visual pathway which allows for the processing and association of the colors and shapes that we see. Why is it so important? Well, the fusiform face area is a portion of the fusiform gyrus. It has its lateral surface towards the middle of the fusiform gyrus, and it plays a critical role in the identification of faces, including your own face. When you see a face, that in turn produces what's called a galvanic skin response, which is tied in with your emotion. And when you have both of those, a galvanic skin response could be something as simple as like a small sweat on your hands or something like that. And when you combine that with your emotion, you're able to recognize an individual. And that, of course, is assisted with the occipital lobe. It also involves body recognition, so being able to see what is a human being, essentially, just understanding the human body on sight. There's also the visual word form area, which is important for the recognition of written words, which allows for consistent reading of words. There's also within category identification, which allows for the discrimination of objects, which could be, for example, understanding what a rose is as opposed to other flowers, or a certain type of water bottle is as opposed to different types of water bottles, so on and so forth. And what else? So there's quite a few clinical associations, as a matter of fact, and first and foremost is prosopagnosia, which is face blindness, and it's an inability to recognize familiar faces even oneself. And like I said earlier, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. It's about someone who just could not recognize somebody. And essentially, you would believe that the person you see is an imposter. And even if that person were to call you, you would then know who they are because of their voice, but you just can't recognize them. You can't identify them as someone close to you because of that disorder. So there's also synesthesia, which we might have all heard of, which is a neurological condition where when you hear a certain word, you might feel a certain color or experience a certain color, and it can also happen when you read letters or numbers. And there's also dyslexia, which we all know and a lot of people deal with. It's a difficulty reading, and it's a trouble decoding the letters. And it's not primarily in the fusiform gyrus, but it is part of it. And there are studies that show that people who deal with dyslexia, that their fusiform gyrus are actually less active, and the gray matter in the fusiform cortex is reduced. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for listening and watching.